economy as an industrialized economy. To achieve a 3,007%, sometimes 10, 15 years ago, and we've never gotten there again. The rest, over the last 20 years, we've been hovering around 6. The middle income country was meant to be achieved through a growth rate of 8%. We certainly will not be able to achieve by the year 2025. It doesn't mean, though, that we've been a wasted effort all along. It has been some progress. If you want to look at this journey as a glass, I've been telling people, look at it as a glass half filled or a glass half empty. If you're a pessimistic individual, you will focus on the glass half empty. If you're an optimistic individual, you will focus on the glass half filled. If you appreciate that the glass is half filled, then you're appreciating that some work has been done, and there's still some work to fill the remaining part of the glass. So, and this is really the journey that we've traveled in terms of growth. Very quickly, 6.1% for the last 2 decades. And this has been an impressive growth. And I'm talking about the rate of growth. If you compare this growth with other countries, be they low-income countries, low, medium, or even high income countries, we've been growing to a certain extent much faster than some other countries which are clustered as high-income countries. And again, I'm talking about the pace of growth. Even at a time when economies were registering negative growth, we posted a positive growth, albeit at a slower rate during the COVID-19. So it can only happen if you have a resilient economy, if you have macroeconomic stability environment that supports growth. And I think for that, we are looking back and say we had some good thing to take forward with us. Again, another measure, like I said earlier on, this was to be measured as an income per capita. We've not done well. I think we're hovering around $1,200 per capita currently. We've got another 2 fiscal years to go, this one and the next one. We will get somewhere, perhaps not $3,000, but certainly much higher than $1,200. And that's much better than $300 per capita in the year 2000. Just so you remember, when we started Vision 2025, the per capita income was $3,300. So we have been registered some growth, which is not where we wanted to be, but of course we have delivered. And there has been some turbulent periods where this has been affected, and we can associate this with a number of areas, and I don't want to dwell into the history because it's water under the bridge. The real focus for now is to look forward and see where we want to go. So on to the next slide. Another measure of our industrialization was to really become a competitive economy, and that was measured by how much we could attract FDI, foreign direct investment, to come in and support our industrialization agenda. As you can see, it's been a roller coaster. At some stage, we were able to attract very high FDI in the years of 2010, 2011, 2013. But of course, in the last 2 or 3 years, our effort has not been very well. Not because of anything internally. Obviously, some of the policies have not been helping us, but we all know that the global challenges that took place during the time did affect our pace of attracting FDI. But this is a measure, and an important measure, so to speak, of our competitiveness, especially as we compare ourselves with the rest of the world. The major item on the battleground today, where countries are fighting for, is fighting for capital to come to the countries. And the better you are in terms of your investment environment, the more you will attract FDI. On to the next slide. Just looking at this specific sector that we are discussing today, it doesn't really paint a very good picture. We were hoping that as we move from an agrarian economy, an extractive economy, this sector will be painting a different picture. But if you look at it as a share of total GDP, this has not been quite impressive. It just shows you that as a share of GDP, it has stubbornly stuck at around 8%. We have never crossed that line over the last 2 decades. That's not a very good story to tell. And this is a big question we need to ask ourselves going forward in the next 25 years. How do we want to change this picture? Because it's critical if we are to uplift people from poverty. But also as a sector, it has not been growing at a pace that is impressive. As you can see, its growth rate has not been very impressive, much lower even if you compare with some of the other sub-Saharan countries. Now, this is a big question that we need to solve in the room, and it takes two to tango between the government and industrial players in here today as we move forward. If we don't fix this, we can forget about talking about poverty eradication in the country, about income generations and income growth, because this is where the real deal is. On to the next slide. Just a bit on the implication of that trend on the export, because the other measure of competitiveness is really our growth of export, and not just growth on volumes, but more so on the value of exports. Now, if you look back, the year 2000, the first 2-3 rows there, you realize that agricultural exports to East Africa, rest of Africa, Asia and EU were pretty much better compared to what we saw in the year 2010. 10 years later, one would have hoped that with the implementation of Vision 2025 and some strategies, this picture would change. By much as agriculture could fall down, you'd be very happy and excited if manufacturing was growing. But look at what is happening at the interplay between agriculture and manufacturing. While agriculture is not growing, in some areas slowing down, manufacturing also does not register much growth, because you would have picked and said, oh, fantastic, we're taking out a lot of people out of farming because we want to see a lot of people going into secondary processing industries, and therefore manufacturing is growing. But the story is not like that. The question really is, when people were moving away from agriculture, where are they going? So our share of export is changing in terms of composition as well. What we are selling to East Africa as agriculture has remained stagnant, except for 2024, 2023, 2025, when COVID-19 really converted Tanzania to be a food basket for the region. And I think that's when we saw agricultural produce growing. I think these chairs have blocked the scene. You can't see what I'm talking about, but you would see that agriculture went up slightly higher, but that is really because of the food we sold in the region. But again, I'm saying, if you look at the extractive sectors, they probably took the lead, and that was following the changes we've made in terms of regulation and environment in the mining sector, when we started seeing some growth in that area. But this picture here is meant to be challenging and giving us to think about what do we do to ensure that we just not export raw value commodities. To what extent do we continue adding value? And this is in line with what the minister said earlier, that we must really start looking at policies that will incentivize processing and make sure that going forward, we take to the market value-added goods and commodities as opposed to sending raw. All in all, the interplay between agriculture and manufacturing does not speak to our transformative agenda. Let's move on to the next slide. This is another picture that talks to our agriculture and manufacturing sectors not really coming to the party. We were hoping that this picture, if you look at the year 2000, 2003, 2004, the balance of trade was narrow. But 20 years on, as we implement the Vision 2025, our balance of trade is widening, it's worsening. It's not getting better. It has been culminated now with the realities when the growth of that negative balance of trade has really pushed us to the limit, to the extent that our reserves have been under pressure. Our exchange rate is currently not necessarily impressive, but even our ability to compete, or rather consume and buy goods, is becoming prohibitive, especially when you consider that our industrialization processes would require to be invested in country, and that would mean a lot more expensive to the investors. Now, this trend speaks more volumes about our ability to sell outside the country more than what we are buying. And so, as we discussed this morning, I'd like us to really unpack the conundrum on how we can get this balance much narrower, as closer as it used to be 2 decades ago, because that's a healthy condition or environment that you want to be in. On to the next slide. So, again, trying to consolidate the picture on where the sector is. If you look at the Tanzania 5-year development plan, the third one that we are currently implementing, the last one in the Tanzania Vision 2025, the target for our manufacturing exports was to be 16.5%. The actual in 2022 was 8.7. 2023 projection is 11.2. Actual, obviously, not necessarily achieving the target that we gave ourselves in the FYDP3. Again, the fact that we're not achieving the targets we gave ourselves speaks volume about our ability to achieve our primary targets of economic growth. And so the concept of value addition and external trade is really valid, and we need to push it forward more aggressively. On to the next slide. So we look at the manufacturing sector as, manufacturing would be much more thriving in the country if a few things are moving. If you look at the picture today, the cost of financing seems to be exorbitant and much more prohibitive. And so sometimes you wonder whether we need to look at our monetary policy and fiscal policies a lot more closely to facilitate and create an environment that could potentially make manufacturing thrive. We're asking ourselves, we know and we are registering quite impressive expansion of credit to private sector, but we are asking whether this is catalytic enough and whether it is dedicated to industrial processing. And perhaps as we look forward in the next 25 years, maybe we need to start discussing around having an industrial development financial institution which will cater for the specific needs of industrial growth. I'll leave it for the panel discussion when we come later. Where are the personal loans and SME loans going? What are they doing? Are they financing lifestyle expenditure, or are we actually going into small-scale, medium enterprising and backyard processing industries? We really want to unpack that, and unfortunately, we may not have the answers because I'm not sure our colleagues and friends from the banking sector will be here to unpack this for us. But it's a question we need to ask ourselves. Is local manufacturing substituting imports for positive export effects? Are we feeling anything? Is the sugar industry template possible to be rolled out? Because I think for those of you who are in the room, if we look back the last 15, 20 years, you're looking at the sugar industry where we were importing almost everything in terms of sugar. Where we are today with the efforts that we've seen in the country, is there a template that we can borrow for other important commodities such as edible oil and other commodities that we're importing for day-to-day consumption? I don't know. I'm just asking the panelists to try and tell us whether it's a template that we can borrow and roll out. Is our geography enhancing our trade, logistics, and transport, or rather helping us to become the hub that we dream a lot. We are bragging about the geography, Tanzania being located in the East Africa region, being at the epicenter of the SADC and East Africa combined. What does that really mean for our growth in the industry? Are we focusing on the local markets? Are we looking at the 60 million Tanzanians, or we're looking at 500 million people that are in the region? Are we going to see a lot more white dents going to South Africa, Yogesh? Can we start seeing more banks going to Mauritius and other countries, Sierra Leone going to countries? I understand we're acquiring bamboo cements. Are we going to see a lot more reverse FDI going out there? How many Bakresas we are going to see crossing borders and being able to really export not only raw materials, but really going and processing out in those countries? Can we start looking at the Africa Free Continental Trade Area as a market, and therefore open up and be able to access that market for much bigger value addition in our balance of trade? I would like to hear more insights from the panelists as we craft our vision for this particular sector that we believe that is a game changer and a real driver of growth when it comes to poverty alleviation in the country. On to the next slide. So there will be some policy questions that I want us to ponder on. And this is for us to take home. Has the manufacturing sector proven its relevance to the economy? Especially because we've been banking a lot on it, and what we've seen does not really give us a smiling face. Were the performance targets achieved at the sectoral level? What are the reasons for success or failure in achieving these targets? What is the way forward for TDV 2050 and operational interventions? Really, these are policy questions that we cannot close ourselves in the room with the teams in the government and start answering. It takes two to tango, and because the government has pronounced itself that it does believe that our drivers for growth will come from the private sector, we need to get some answers here, because we really are going to co-create the solution together. On to the next slide. As we look for those answers, I want us to also put it on the back of our minds. Some of the driving forces, not only for Tanzania, but I believe these are also affecting everybody else globally. In the next 25 years, demographics will be a real deal. It will determine what we are doing. And I'm talking about the population. We now know that there will be about 10 billion people living on planet Earth in the year 2050. 129 million of those will be living in a country called Tanzania. And of course, there will be about 1.6 billion living in India and 1.7 billion in China. These are massive populations. The question we want to ask ourselves is, are we going to start focusing only on the 129 people, or are we going to be brave enough and say, we want to be part and parcel of the global value chains and take advantage of that massive number of human beings that are going to be living on planet Earth? There will be a big conversation around resources and the environment. I think all the speakers that have spoken before me here have alluded to the importance of environmental sustainability, but also resources, and making sure that our resources indeed are delivering the results. And therefore, as we talk resources, some resources will probably be obsolete. We've talked about coal as a potential energy provider for our economy. And some people have said, let's keep the coal for our future generation. The challenge is the future generation is going to say, we don't need coal as a source of energy. So it will be obsolete. We have a lost opportunity over the last 50 years to take advantage of coal, and now coal will be discarded as people look for much cleaner energy, environmentally sustainably, and therefore we need to start considering, what about our sources of energy? We still need to industrialize our economy. And apparently, we seem to have almost all the sources of energy, but as a country, we haven't been able to explore all these sources of energy. even though some of the energy sources that we have do have some contribution to the sustainability and supporting of the environment. So that's a key force of change that will determine how the world economy is run. I'm sure a number of you in the room have tried to access funds locally and internationally. You need now to check the box of how your strategy for environmental support is coming up. If you don't show that, you're hardly going to access financing, not only from local financing institutions, but I think from global institutions. So trade finance, investment, these are going to be changing. The changing pattern of globalization, where people are now changing from trading goods to trading ideas and capital. People are now not necessarily selling goods, they're actually going to where ideas are designed, technology is, and that's where goods are going to be produced. And so perhaps we need to start talking about, can we ask people who are selling motor vehicles in the automobile value chain, that maybe Tanzania has not been there yet, but probably for every motor vehicle that goes out there, there's going to be a battery, and we have some lithium resources here that we can start asking for people to come here and produce batteries, and before you know it, we're part and parcel of the automobile value chain at a global scale. As people get more richer and incomes are generated, people will stop buying goods and buy services. If you have one car already and you're living a middle income life, you probably are not interested in buying 2, 3, 4 cars. You're now going to be spending more money on holidays, eating out, and buying more services as opposed to buying goods and services. I think global value chains are going to be more pronounced. We cannot isolate ourselves and say, we are Tanzania, we want to do this for ourselves. By the way, we are a very small market. The real deal really is to find how can we get into the global value chains. This is how we're going to be conglomerates, global conglomerates or regional conglomerates. So conversation around value chains, whether they are production value chains, supply value chains, logistics, this is the conversation we need to have. And I would like to see to what extent the Tanzanian manufacturing sector is prepared to be part and parcel of this global direction. Government, governance, and business environment critical. We've been talking about the blueprint. Every time we address one challenge, because of the development and the changing pattern of the economy, another challenge arises. So we've realized that the blueprint is now going to be a living document, and an environment that needs to improve continuously. And so together we need to co-create this, and I think Tanzania has a very good setup where this blueprint is monitored jointly between the government and the private sector through TNBC. So again, government has realized that it will need to check on the governance on how it does conduct the economy. Under the leadership of the President, Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, an assessment has been done, and she's come up with the 4 R's. It's a clear and very bold statement to say we've assessed ourselves, we realize that we need to reconstruct, we need to rebuild, we need to reconcile, and we need to fix some of the things that we feel they are broken. It's bold, it's courageous. We're going to ask for what are the 4 R's from the manufacturing sector as well, because it takes 2 to tango. I believe there are some revelations that you need to also assess and tell yourself that if the government has checked itself and realized that there's work to be done, clearly we have to also look at the sector and decide how do we address that. Obviously, technology races on. We now know what type of technologies are going to dictate the global arena. What we don't know really is the pace of that change. But I think we all realize that we will need to grapple with the fast changing race of technology. And therefore, even our manufacturing models may probably change to more technology driven, and therefore we need to invest more on skills as opposed to massive population peoples that we can put in on the factory floors, and more usage of designers and technology to improve the efficiency of our production methods. And so these are the things that as we craft our vision and as we listen to the ideas this morning, we want people to be aware of some of the forces that are blowing out there, and we cannot go against them, because then we will not be successful. On to the next slide. So our strategic options for sustainable economic growth over the next 25 years. And this is really coming out of the consultation we've done so far over the last 2 or 3 months, talking to people, different groups of people. We have been told that there's no way we can avoid population and scenario-based plans. You know, the dynamics, the demographics are changing, and therefore big data and statistics will drive our plans, because we really will be responding to what the people are looking for. So we now know that some regions of the world will have an aging population, while others are going to have youth populations. How do we balance and make sure that as we target these markets, we target the right people and the right groups with correct products? I think the other thing is progressive and inclusive private sector. Again, we are not disagreeing as a country. I think we've come to a consensus that if we are not going to support a progressive and inclusive private sector, we should forget about our growth. And that's a reality. The real challenge for us is really to learn how to walk this talk. And I think that is what we have to figure out this morning in this conversation. Again, I've talked about global value chains. We cannot afford to be in isolation. We cannot. So opening the country by making sure that we have something to take to the market. Sometimes we worry about opening the country because we have nothing to take to the market, and the worry is we will end up being a dumping place. I guess as industrialists, as manufacturing sector, let's work together and make sure that we take advantage of our all massive advantage that we have, whether it's natural resources, whether it's goods and commodities that we have. Can we perfect our art and be able to take something to the market? Because then we will be part and parcel of the global value chains and start reaping the benefit that exists in there. It goes without saying, we have to redefine the quality of our human capital. And this is really talking to not about how many people we are taking into graduation in the universities. It's about the human beings we are creating in the name of Tanzanians. From the time we get birth into getting these children, making them global citizens. If we're going to create children that are going to be Tanzanians, 20 years down the road, we will have people who think about closing themselves in because they don't have the confidence to face the world. So our human capital strategies must start from the early childhood intervention all the way to, we have done well as a government providing education and for all by making sure that there's universal standards that we are achieving. But I think the wananchi that we are talking to now, they are appreciating that. The question they're asking is, we want to know the quality of education that comes from those classrooms that we've created. So I think the most important thing for us is that we cannot afford to call ourselves global players if we are not able to up our game in human capital. Job markets predictions need to be predicted. What do we need to see in the next 5, 10, 25 years as we move forward? The economy is digitally transforming, and that is done very quickly. Whether we want it or not, it's a global wind that is blowing. We can choose to go against the wind, but we'll be blown. I think the real deal for us is to make sure that the fourth industrial revolution, we do not become observers anymore. We observe the first industrial revolution, the second and the third. This one, we have to be active participants. Otherwise, we're going to be left behind and very far. Obviously, our financial system needs to be rechecked. Not only ours, but also the global financial system. But I think ours needs to get much deeper with a lot more instruments that can support growth. And I said earlier on, maybe one of the interrogations we need to make is to have an industrial financial institution that can support development of manufacturing sector. In Connected infrastructure, this is important for trade and marketing. So again, taking advantage of the region and the geography that God has given us, where we have 8 countries, depending on Tanzania as a gateway to the rest of the world. We need to really capitalize on this and make sure that we're going to the bank smiling, taking advantage of the geography that God has given us. And obviously, the ESG framework, environment, social, and governance framework, very critical. It's becoming a vocabulary of the world. If you don't speak this language, if you don't walk the talk, you're out of the rest. So it's important for us to begin to embrace these principles, because these are the principles that will open the door for us to become global players and significant global players who will be respected on that dinner table. On to the next slide. And so, looking at all those things that we've said, I just summarized 4 things that we really want to look at as a way forward. Vision 2050 will focus on manufacturing industries as a pathway for economic transformation. We still believe that. This has been our belief in the last 25 years. It still is. And we've checked. No research has shown that we can jump this. I'm looking at Professor Wangwe, maybe he's got some magics that Tanzania can leapfrog and jump this transformation process. I've not read one country that have jumped this, but let's hear from the panel. Understanding global value chains and develop a strategy for active participation would be most beneficial for us. Emphasis on actionable implementation of industrial policies and alignment, and I'm stressing the word alignment here. In this country, we've suffered, and rightfully so, we admit, and that's where the 4 R's come in, where our policies have not been speaking the same language. One policy talks growth, the other policy talks something else. So policy alignment is going to be very, very critical if we are to make the progress. And finally, of course, addressing the barriers from laws and regulations at local, national, and regional and international levels. This is really moving away from control, prohibition, to facilitation and supporting. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think that as I get to the end of my presentation, I thought these 4 items will be areas that broadly will guide and help us to really unpack our journey over the next 25 years towards Vision 2050. I don't know whether there's anything else to say here. The guy has refused to move the slides, and that's the end of my conversation. Karibuni sana. So maybe for the Swahili, because I know you guys will start coming out there and want us to say, what did you say there? In 1 minute, nimepata nafasi ya kukutana na shirikisho la Wenye Viwanda Tanzania, na mjadala wa leo unahusu namna ambavyo sekta ya viwanda itachangia katika matayarisho ya Dira ya Maendeleo 2050. Na katika kufanya hivyo tumejaribu kuangalia namna ambavyo sekta hii imechangia katika miaka 25 iliyopita. Mchango wake haujawa kama ambavyo tulitarajia, lakini bado tunaamini ya kwamba hii ndio sekta ambayo ikiwa tutafanya vizuri na kuisupport kama nchi kwa ushirikiano na sekta binafsi, ndio sekta ambayo itawezesha mabadiliko ya kiuchumi ambayo ni muhimu katika kupunguza umaskini miongoni mwa Tanzania. Na tunasema hivyo kwa sababu sekta hii ndio yenye uwezo ya kuajiri watu wengi na kuwapa kipato cha juu. Ikiwa lengo letu ni kwenda kuwa nchi ya kipato cha kati au kipato cha juu, basi ni lazima tuhakikishe kwamba sekta hii ya viwanda inalelewa, inatengenezewa mazingira ya kukua ili iweze kusaidia zile sekta zingine za uzalishaji kama vile sekta ya kilimo, mifugo na uvuvi, na kuiwezesha nchi sasa kupunguza au kuondoa kabisa utaratibu wa kuuza mazao ghafi nje ya nchi na kuuza mazao ambayo yameongezewa thamani kwa kupitia uzalishaji viwandani. Hali hiyo ikiweza kufanyika, basi tutakuwa na nafasi nzuri zaidi ya kuongeza tija na kuongeza ukuaji katika viwanda vyetu, kuongeza mapato au mauzo ya nje na kuongeza fedha za kigeni. Na kwa hivyo tunapata maoni na tumepata maoni ambayo yatatuwezesha kuweka mikakati au maono kwenye dira yetu ya 2050 ya kuiwezesha sekta ya viwanda kuchukua nafasi yake katika kuharakisha maendeleo ya Watanzania. Asante. I am told I'm also the moderator. So I'm going to have to call my panelists so that they can come and reflect on what I've said. Those who believe that I have lied to the audience, they should tell me, no, Lawrence, you lied. So Professor Wangwe, Colonel Simbakalia, P.S. Uledi, Yogesh, Paul, please karibu on the podium, on the floor. Okay, so it's a bit weird, but let's try. So I am not going to attempt to introduce my panelists because the last time I did to a very good friend of mine, after the event, he came back to me very furious. Lawrence, don't you realize that I'm a CPA? Why didn't you say that I am CPA in the introduction? So to avoid that, let me just take 1 minute, and I mean 1 minute. If less, that would be fantastic. Just take the mic. If you decide to undersell yourself, just do so. If you want to oversell yourself, just do so. But do that in a minute or less.
Thank you, Yogesh Manik, MEC Group of Companies.
Thank you. My name is Lady Musa, former PS Industry and Trade, but also I have been the chief negotiator for Tanzania in international trade, both regional and multilateral. And currently, I'm a consultant, but also the chairperson of the Tanzania Revenue Authority.
Thank you, Samuel Wangwe. I'm a retired professor of economics, but also retired executive director of ESRF, also retired executive director of REPOA, and now I'm attached to ESRF as an associate, but also to them as a consultant.
Mimi ni Colonel Joseph Simbakalia, mstaafu jeshi la wananchi. Nimetumikia taifa kwa nafasi mbalimbali ndani ya jeshi, nje ya jeshi, katika sekta ya umma serikalini. Jumla ya miaka 49 na sasa hivi naendelea bado kutumikia. Mimi ni mwenyekiti wa kampuni ya ranch ya Tanzania. Kwa hiyo mimi mfuga ng'ombe. Asante.
Asante sana. Mimi naitwa Paul Makanza, mwenyekiti wa CTI. In fact, Mafuru amesahau kusema, ukitazama panel hii, the combined experience is over 100 years old.
Mimi naitwa Ali Seleman, nafikiri ndio panelist mdogo kuliko wote hapa. Sija staff. Kuna staff wengi na nafikiri nitajifunza mengi kutoka kwa staff. Mimi ni partner BDO East Africa.
Okay, so you can imagine hizo introductions zilivyokuwa varied, alafu mimi nikikosea ingekuwaje. So now I'm scotch free. I'll go out there very peacefully. We'll shake hands and nobody will complain. Manik, I'm going to have to start with you because you're just sitting just close to me. 25 years ago, looking back, please provide some insights, especially looking at this industrial sector, manufacturing, that this morning is dedicated for. And this is a question that's probably very, very relevant to you because the first time I met you was, as personally, it was when you were taking White Dent to South Africa. And then, of course, I've had the opportunity of working with you when you took the bank to Comoros and then Uganda and the country, the Horn of Africa. Which one is this? This country at the Horn of Africa? Yeah? So please talk to me about your views in a minute or two, trying to look the journey that we've traveled. And as you do so, also tell us what would you want to see as we craft our vision for 2050 as a country.
Thank you very much for this loaded question. I need to be very careful sitting in between the veterans here. I'm not an economist, but I think I'm a good businessman. I've been in existence in business for the last 50 years. We are very diversified as a company from very many sectors, be it financial, be it infrastructure, but manufacturing is a key part of our business. Lawrence is right. I mean, those were the days 25 years back when we also had a vision to grow, and today also we have the same vision. When this Vision 2025, I distinctly remember, was led by Dr. Jonas Kipokola, and he used to kind of be gaga about it. This is our vision, this is where we are going to reach, and I think it's done a lot. It's always good to set a vision than not to have one, and I'm glad that almost getting over to that, we are talking about Vision 2050. A lot has been achieved. I don't want to go into the history, all the operational issues, regulatory issues. Quite a bit has changed, and today we feel that we are in a much better environment under the current leadership, and we feel far more confident than we ever were as investors in manufacturing sector. At that time, we used to stare at Kenya and be, fear of Kenya. The soap will come from there, the fat cooking oil will come from there. Those fears have gone. But what we see now is Africa free continent trade, and that's staring at us. And if we craft our vision 2050 rightly and walk the talk, I think we have every reason to lead and succeed and be amongst the leading country in Africa. I was just talking to Mr. Waziri while sitting next to him that, what is the role of private sector in the Vision 2050 core team? And he said, we do have private sector, and we do now going forward, it will be open so everybody can give their inputs. And I think this is very important, that we give inputs, but we also make it far more inclusive, like this, what today CTI has done. And if we can periodically review every 2-3 years and take private sector inputs as to what we want. So let's take, for example, I as a group, I have a vision to grow within Africa. What are my barriers? What is stopping me from doing that? I think I'm able to do in the business that I'm doing. I think I'm probably as good as anybody in Africa could be. You talked about Bagresa, it's an example. We do have our distribution and other businesses today in 6-7 African countries. And what are the problems? And I see two issues as main. One, I think the tax regime needs to change to allow the investments outside Tanzania. That to me is very, very important, because you find that double taxation, punitive taxation, it takes a long time to get this resolved. What's the point of double taxing me for my business I do in Djibouti or in Uganda? And this is a fact I'm talking, I'm not just talking from somebody else. And for the last 6 to 7 years, I've been kind of bragging and writing virtually everywhere in the country to say, but why are you taxing me twice? For what? You are being punitive or for me to invest outside the country. And everybody hears that, but nobody can do anything about it. This is what is required, which is quick, fast changes. And I think that will help a lot. And second is to allow fundraising outside Tanzania in a more freer way. So for example, if I want to put my offshore base, let's say in Mauritius, so that I can raise a bigger amount of funds out there and cheaper, like Lawrence said, costs are not so cheap here, to be competitive, it's very difficult to do so. So I think it's very important that we look at those issues, that why it's not happening. Now let's take a classic example. I'm a southerner, I'm born in Lindi, and ever since I've been seeing, and cashew nut has gone through many changes in the last 60, 70 years in front of my eyes. During the 50s and 60s, the British were taking it in raw form. Later on, until the 2000, the Indians were taking it in its raw form. And now Vietnamese are taking it in its raw form. What's going on? Does it really take so long for us to process our own cashew nuts? So do a feasibility, for example, right? Easiest one. We need cashew nuts to process. We have the best quality. We need excess and port to kind of send, and it's just 1 kilometer away. And we need labor. Cheap labor, not really specialized educated labor. We have it. Why can't we crack this? What's going on? What's the problem? And this is where I say that if this Vision 2050 would also have a good, inclusive, planning, I think it will bring in the desired results. The future is great, and I'm sure that we will get there from what we are hearing today. Thank you, Lawrence.
PS Uledi, you had the opportunity of serving as a PS industry and trade. If clocks were to be turned back and you called back to office today, what would you do differently in terms of looking at the manufacturing sector today or then and saying these are the things we should not continue doing and we should stop? And I'm talking about us who are sitting in policy-making positions. What would you do differently?
Thank you so much, Mr. Mafuru. That is a very difficult question. But I thought that what I could do differently is perhaps redefine the definition of development. The scholars and other stakeholders in the development world, they have tempted to convince us that development is poverty alleviation. That is a humanistic definition of development. And once we adopt such a definition, then industrialization, which is linked to economic transformation, becomes irrelevant. And therefore, I would request my colleagues in the Planning Commission who are working on the Vision 2050 to redefine development in the 2050 vision, so that instead of being humanistic, and I'm happy that Mr. Mafuru used the word in terms of someone having a full meal, 3 meals a day, that is your development. You forget about the transformation of the economy, the structure. And that's where industrialization comes in. Because there is both theoretical and the empirical evidence that shows that as the per capita GDP rises, also the structure of your productive sectors changes. If your per capita income is less than 2,000 US dollars, you are likely to have industries that are more resource-based. 50% resource-based. 20% labor capital, labor intensive, and 30% skills and capital intensive. What does that mean? It means that since our per capita income is less than 2,000 US dollars, we have a bigger chance to develop our resource-based manufacturing sector. And since Tanzania is highly endowed in terms of resources, natural resources, there is no reason why our manufacturing sector shouldn't be resource-based at this level of our development. Now, as you go up, the structure changes. You move from resource-based, you go to labor-intensive, you move from labor-intensive, you move to skill-intensive as well as capital-intensive. And then Mr. Mafuru, something which I would have done differently is that our skill base should change. Let me tell you one interesting example. When I was PS Industry and Trade, we did a study. We asked ourselves, why are manufactured goods from China cheaper than our own? We checked on the labor cost. Theirs is higher than ours. Our labor is cheaper. Economically then, our goods, our industrial goods should be cheaper. Then we asked the Chinese, what is different? What is something different that you are doing, that we are not doing? I invited them here. My focus on the textile industry and garments. I took them to Bukoba. There was a new garments industry, as well as we have got a training institution in Bukoba for garments manufacturing. Our first stop was the institute, the training center at TV81. Then I noted that the Chinese were not interested in looking at our training institution. Then I asked, what's the problem? Because I expected some comments from them. After that visit, we took them to the manufacturing industry, a brand new one. When we reached the manufacturing industry, the garment one, the Chinese opened up, they told us that, look here, these tailoring machines that are being used in this factory, they are the ones which were supposed to be at your training institute. Because those which you are using at the training institute are for household use, not for industrial use. So you are training those guys there to work on their households, then not the industry. That's when we asked our colleagues at the Ubungo Export Promotion Zone to train our people for the manufacturing sector, for the government manufacturing sector. So my humble request is that we should, in our Vision 2050, look at our TVET if they actually train people who are they are demanded by the private sector, the industrial sector. But also the attitude of our youth. Even if you train them, when they work in the factories, they are not so good. That attitude should be looked at as well. Thank you.
We'll come back to you. Mheshimiwa Waziri, poverty alleviation vis-a-vis wealth creation. We've been debating this. We're now asked to really drop this conversation about poverty alleviation because it's too low a target. It's not motivating enough to make progress. But let's talk to the industrial economist in the room. Professor Wangwe, you have been around. You probably you've actually participated in putting together Vision 2025. The economy has not transformed enough as we would wish. If you are to tell Tanzanians the do's and don'ts in order to not repeat the sluggish transformation we've seen, the economy not being inclusive, and really our growth has come from sectors that are not necessarily taking us to the next level. What are the bullets or the silver bullets that we should use to ensure that in the next 25 years, this economy indeed transforms?
Thank you very much. The first thing I would like to appreciate the Honorable Minister Lawrence Mafuru have really preempted us in a positive way. They've actually done this. Yeah, thank you. They've covered a lot of ground, so we have very little to add. The first thing I would like to start with and emphasize is your last slide, but one. Essentially recognizing that we are now in a competitive global economy, regional economy, up to the national level. Competitive. So the first thing we'd like to address is building the capacity to compete of industry. In the 70s, we defined the basic industry strategy, focusing on two things. One, transformation of the economy, and therefore restructuring industry, making industry produce basic goods and intermediate and capital goods. That's the kind of restructuring which was envisaged in the mid-70s. And in the 70s, actually much progress was made in that area. But the weakest point, and which continued to be the case even after Vision 25, is building an industry which can compete, position itself in the global economy, position itself in the regional economy, but also be appealing to consumers in the national economy such that they are attracted to consume industrial products from our industry, our country. Now, gaining the capacity to compete. I did a book on this subject for Africa. I did 6 African countries as case studies. 4 points came out, which we thought are very critical in building the capacity to compete. The first one is investment. But that investment must be inclusive of technology. Investment must look at technology in the sense that you are investing looking far. 2 is investment in human resources. And investment in human resources is, you can see it in 2 parts. 1, what the state actually does to produce graduates and other educated people who have that right education for human resources. But secondly, is the private sector itself, how to invest in human capital in a continuous way. And this, by the way, should be incentivized by government to be able to do what they call deductible taxation, because you invested in investments. But third is investing in understanding markets in the country, in the region, in the world. Where can we position ourselves and how are markets changing over time? But fourth and last is investing in networks. Know who is producing what, who is doing what, where. So those four things contribute extremely well to the capacity to compete on technology and contributing to the capacity to compete.